too big. It's on purpose. And there is some air. Here is empty. If this tissue has to grow, I have to leave the space for let it grow. So, the baobab seed is inside here. It's covered, but I leave some space. So this is the cartoon. Baobab seed, which is a micrograft. And I will use the provisional in order to protect the coagulum, the blood clot. And then this tissue will mature with giving hypertrophy, with an hyperplastic maturation. And then the provisional has to guide this maturation. The emergence profile, if you reduce it as I did, you leave some space, and the baobab seed will increase the volume in that space. You cannot do 1 kilometer, but a little can make a difference in the frontal area. If you have too much, you increase the volume of the resin in this direction, and you will obtain an increase of the tissue thickness. So the plan is that this tissue grows up to the top of the emergence profile, then follow the emergence profile in order to give a new volume of the tissue, in a condition of bone that usually do not permit this. The only reason why this tissue will grow is the tuberosity. Otherwise, for sure, there will be a resorption. Three months. Start growing. 6 months. Now it's getting bigger, also horizontally. Now we apply digital smile design described by Christian Kochman, so we can change the volume of the resin. So they are very similar. And then I wait for a stabilization. I never change the emergence profile before 6 months, because the blood supply is not yet ready to be damaged. One year later, I am ready for the final prosthetics. The relationship between the provisional and the tissue is not deep. It's mainly horizontal. The resin is not going deep. You will see later on why, but it would be a mistake. I do not have to invade the biologic width. And it's easy to remove the cement, because if you just touch the tissue, you can see the abutment. It's not deep. You can reach very easy. The tissue is very sharp and well positioned. The relationship with the bone is not favorable for this papilla. There's no reason for the papilla to stay here, or this papilla to stay here. The only reason is the baobab that is keeping an abnormal volume. And this is the volume that it comes alone. I didn't do that. It did by itself. And tissue is perfectly healthy. Look how big the volume it became by itself. So this is the way you can use the baobab seed to create the full volume that you need. The better, of course, is bone regeneration. But this can be a good compromise. This is one of the different techniques that can be used to replicate the emergence profile. Because if you don't change the emergence profile, the tissue will not change their position. The beginning was here, the target was this, and this is the follow-up. Little change that can make the difference. Radiograph. Look how long is the papilla. I like to call it the baobab seed effect. And this is the baobab, the big tree in Africa. Unfortunately, due to a lack of water, this year it's extinguishing, it's reducing dramatically the number. So let's make the Save the Baobab team. So this is the theory and this is the effective. Three years later, the volume is keeping very well. And again, 4 years later, is even getting better because the surface becomes smooth. Tissue are very natural. And this seems to be a new route. And the volume keeps staying there, very stable. This is a gold ceramic crown. So every time you choose to make a graft, you can choose which kind of graft you want to use. And this is the base of the phenotype modulation. If you take from the surface, it's easy to take, it's very stable, but if you leave exposed, it's too white. If you take the bilaminar, the red, the deep part, it's more difficult to take. You can have some bleeding problems, especially with old patients, because the arteriovenous shunts are more often represented. It reduces approximately by 50% its volume, so you have to overcorrect a lot. Generally, it not have problem of color, so you can leave exposed. Sometimes you might want to use the tuberosity. This is the most dangerous area. Easy to harvest. No pain for the patient, very little. You must not leave exposed. The color is very white. And the tendency is to grow too much. Unless you use it inside the receiving tissue. So it will express the tendency of overgrowth from the inside. Use a learning curve. Don't use the tuberosity first time in frontal area. First time you use in posterior. So you learn how to use it. There is a learning curve. But if you achieve knowing how to use this, you can correct very easily some defect, also in aesthetic area. We have been talking about tissue graft. But in English, they say that tissue is the issue. But the bone sets the tone. Correctly, I was asked before, sorry, but how much bone do you need? You cannot correct everything only with soft. Do you remember in this case there was no reason for the tissue to grow? But we noticed at the CBCT that there was almost 2 millimeters buccal to the implant after 4 years. And the tissue growed. I want to know why. I want to understand what is the ideal site, because I need parameters on Monday morning in order to know if I have to graft or not. So we tried to do something that haven't been done before, which is mapping the tissue maturation around implants. We began this before the digital era. At that time it was more difficult to map tissue maturation. It is a perspective study with consecutive enrollment of the patient. What means that I didn't choose only the good ones. I took everybody from one day to the other. Standardized radiograph means that all the periapical radiograph were used with a centrator, and the centrator was relied with silicone in the same position. So a silicone stent was keeping at any control the radiograph in the same position. Exclusion criteria are any bone regeneration sites and general factors that avoid placing implants, of course. The number of implants examined at 1 year is approximately more than 200. At 2 years is more than 150. At 3 years, more than 100. At 4, almost 90. And at 5, 43. In order to understand how tissue mature around implants, we harvested per each implant 202 measurements. It's crazy. 202 data for each implant. And we ended up with 70,000 data values. It took me 7 years to do this, and 8 people have been working at this project. The baseline for the bone values was taken at the surgery. And the baseline for the final for the soft tissue values was at the delivery of the final prosthodontics. And then we made the follow-up at 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, and so on. If you print the XL in Times New Roman 12, it will be long 12 meters, longer than this room. So there are really a lot of data. We can speak about the results for a week. But I will focus on what we really need today. We measure the thickness of the bone in the buccal sides. And we compared if the buccal bone measured after implant positioning was affecting the bone resorption. Yes, it was. So the Pearson of significance is very high. Those implants that has more than 1.5 millimeter of bone had very stable bone behind. But this is not important for us. The patient don't care. They don't smile making a radiograph. They want to see this. So we measure the height of the tooth from zenith to incisal edge. Those implants that has more than 1.5 millimeter of buccal bone shows after 5 years a creeping of tissue of half millimeter by average. Maturing was positive for this implant. By average, tissue was increasing the volume, getting better, like the good wine. But when the buccal bone was thinner than 0.5 millimeter, there was always a recession. The average is 1 millimeter. But sometimes there was a 4 millimeter recession. And this is really highly significant value. I do all the statistics by my own, so you can ask me whatever from these statistics. Do you think papilla will be affected by the buccal bone? Yes, but nobody told before. Now we have numbers because we need parameters. Those implants that has more than 1.5 millimeter of bone showed 5-time papilla extension over maturation period. And again, it's significant. The papilla matures very far away in time. Do not expect to have full papilla at 1 year. It's normal, it's too early. It takes more time to mature. That's why I hate the one who shows 6 month or 1 year follow-up. It means nothing. Problems occur at 2 or 3 years. And another thing that motivated very high papilla was the quantity of keratinized mucosa. There is a proportion. The more keratinized mucosa you have, and the more papilla height you gain. This is a delta, so -2 means more. And the break point is here. So the average required keratinized mucosa to have a good papilla extension is 2.5 millimeter. If you don't have enough keratinized mucosa, even in frontal area, say bye-bye to your papilla. This is a really confident number. So you have to surgically act in order to have always keratinized mucosa around the implant. Last number, otherwise you have headache. We also measure the distance in the zenith, buccal zenith, from the emergence profile, the free gingival margin, to the bone. And we compared to the bone resorption. It's strange. If you put the implant too much next to the surface, you might have some bone remodeling. The best performance was here. What number is this? Can you say? 4. Put this 4 here again in the post-it. It's the 3rd time we see this number. It's always the same. Three different studies are showing number 4 for this measurement. Our post-it is getting heavy. So if this distance is 4 millimeter, the bone is more stable. And this is significant again. With this implant, of course. So, using switched implants, if your buccal bone is more than 1.5 millimeter, let's consider 2. Consider 2 because clinically it's difficult to measure 1.5. And you have enough keratinized mucosa, we can assume that we will have less risk of recession, less risk of resorption, and more chance for papilla extension. 5 times more. 5 times more is a lot. Is 500% more. Is a lot. Now we need some knowledge in biomechanics to better understand this. So let me present this design. First of all, This study was also influenced by the type of implant that was used. I'm not here to sell anything. So do not think of my words as a seller. I'm here to share the knowledge that I have. There are 3 different types of implants in the market. And the shape of the tip can be self-tapping like this one. Partially tapping like this one. This is, for example, 3i. This is, for example, A1. And knife thread. For example, this is English. I don't know how much experience of different companies you have. I draw implants from many companies. Or I fix their biomechanical problems, so it's part of my work. So I've been using a lot of implants in my office. My assistants, they die trying to understand what pieces from which company. But with this design, it's a very old design, originally from Denmark. You make a hole of 3 or 3.25 millimeter. And you put an implant of 4 millimeter. What happens to the bone? Will it be expanded or grinded? The tapping part will destroy the bone. So, if you have 2 millimeter, you place the implant, and then you have what? You always lose 1 millimeter by protocol. It's normal. And you will always lose in the buccal part, never in the palatal or lingual, because this bone is harder. There is a gradient of density of the bone. That's why fistula goes out. Imagine the problem if the fistula goes inside the brain. No good. So this is soft, and the self-tapping will destroy this part, destroy it. There are different implants with knife threads like this one. And look what happens. It's a totally different story. The threads disappear inside the bone and the bone grows back on top of the implant. Show you again. This is a wide one, so you can see better. This is a 4.8 hole for a 6 millimeter implant. So it cuts the bone, flows inside, and the bone grows back on top of the implant. It's not normal for the other implant. It's just destroyed. It doesn't come back. And if you cut it, you will feel it's very stable. And you see how much bone we save due to the fact that there is cutting edge threads. And I would like you to notice another thing. With the self-tapping implant, the bone is chipped. If you chip the bone,